In this video, we're trying out the new Arco grinder from Goat Story. Welcome, my name is Patrick Rolfe and this is Coffee with April. For this episode, we are testing a fairly new grinder on the market. And this grinder comes from Goat Story, and it's called Arco. I believe they did a Kickstarter campaign quite successfully, and now they're kind of starting to ship this out. In terms of full transparency here, we got this sent to us. We have not paid for it. However, we're gonna do a review of it anyway, and we're gonna gift this to someone at Patreon, right? So just a few kind of initial insights about the grinder. I've been using it at home now for about a week. And we've done some interesting measurements here as well. So we're gonna walk you through the kind of grinder in itself, and then we're gonna brew some coffee and let you know our opinions on it. So one of the interesting things with this grinder, of course, is that it's both kind of a hand grinder and a mechanical grinder at the same time. So you can basically choose to put this in, which is kind of cool, right? It leaves a few challenges that we're gonna come back to, but that's an interesting feature, right? So moving on, it has quite a lot of different settings. So up to 240 different grind sets, which is kind of, you would ask, do we need all of that? Good question, not sure. In my experience, probably not, but it's always good to have the option. Most importantly, it does both espresso and filter, which is also a good thing. Now, one of the things that I really appreciated actually is that the kind of grinding chamber fits perfectly into a portafilter. So that makes it really easy if I want to brew espresso with it, right? Now for this video, we're gonna focus on a little bit of filter coffee, but we'll come back and do an espresso version as well, right? It's just an interesting observation. When using the grinder, it's very kind of slick, simple. It's not too difficult. It has a little bit of a hopper here, on and off switch, and that's basically it. When you change the grind size, you actually have 3 different levels where you can go full circle and then end up at different grind sizes. Also quite intuitive. They have a little bit of a recommended way to do things on the bottom, which we find to be actually quite accurate in terms of what we're using, especially when it comes to filter coffee. The brews we're gonna do today is on the kind of second round on the setting 20. But here is when it gets interesting. So one of the first things that we thought about with this grinder is the fact that, okay, so RPMs is everything in terms of grinding, right? So the speed of grinding makes a massive difference on particle distribution. So the question that we kind of ask ourselves is, okay, but if we use the same setting and we grind it manually versus grinding it with using the machine, what will actually come out? And kind of as we thought, it's quite different. So you have 2 vastly different grind qualities using the same setting. So this is kind of interesting because that means it's not as easy as just kind of transitioning from the same setting from a manual to a machine state. You actually have to recalibrate. More importantly, the grind quality in terms of distribution of smaller fines and larger particles, boulders, is very different. So first of all, we have about a total difference of 50 microns on both of them, which is kind of interesting, right? But most importantly, the grind we do on the machine here has a much larger amount of fines in general. It's a very big difference, whereas the one we do manually has a lot less fines, but a lot more boulders, right? So it's not just about we change the grind size, we also change the distribution of particle size within that grind. That's kind of an interesting observation, and we'll be a little bit curious to know what they clearly they thought about this, we assume. So I assume they're gonna be able to come back to us after this video and tell us how you're kind of supposed to work with that, because in our experience, the distribution of the grind size is gonna have the biggest impact on the taste, right? So micron is important, but basically different microns with the same constellation is quite easy to work with, but different microns with a different constellation makes brewing coffee quite difficult. So we kind of wonder what's up with that and what the consideration there is, right? However, for this video, for the sake of an experiment, we then have made 2 different grinds, one manually, one on the machine. Same grind setting. Again, we're using about 20 on kind of the second round. And we're gonna just brew them side by side. Using the April brewer the way we normally do, we're using a 12-gram dose. We're going to pour a total of 200 grams of water. The water temperature sits at 91 degrees Celsius, and we're brewing a washed Pacamara varietal from the El Socorro farm in Guatemala. Beautiful kind of clean melony coffee with quite a lot of florals. So the interesting thing here is just basically see, okay, so how are these coffees actually comparing to each other? And what do they, or how do they come out in terms of strength, TDS, and two, in terms of flavor, right? Because this is going to be quite different. We experienced that basically the distribution of the particle size is one of the more important things when it comes to taste quality. Now, we should say that we by no means are those that would advocate for uniformity in grind size, because uniformity in grind size does not exist on a coffee grinder. That's just a reality. That's a little bit of a wasted conversation. What's more interesting is to discuss what is that particle distribution and how does those different kind of particle distribution actually taste like. So we finished up our second pour here. We're basically going to allow these to go down, taste them, evaluate them, and then come back to you here in this video and give you a little bit more kind of insight in what we thought taste-wise and a few more notes on the grinder. So see you soon. So we're back with a little bit of insight in these two different brews, right? So first of all, we end up getting quite similar strength, which is kind of our target strength here at April, which is around 1.2 to 1.3 in a filter coffee. We're definitely close to the 1.2 here. However, what's interesting is that even though the strength is similar, the taste is actually quite different, right? So we ended up with the machine brew being basically, or having a smaller particle size, about 50 microns less than the hand grinded, right? And then we also ended up with that grind to have more fines or less boulders. Maybe that's the most important part here. And what's happening is that the machine grind is actually tasting a little bit better balanced, a little bit sweeter, which we kind of actually prefer, whereas the hand grind becomes a little bit drier, a little bit unstructured. However, they are both good cups of coffee. I think what's important here is just a difference. So if you, for example, is trying to use this at home versus, you're using the machine at home and you bring in the hand grinder with you when you're out traveling or whatever you do with it, I assume that's the idea with the Constellation. You actually can't use the same grind size if you want to get the same result. I think that's the biggest kind of challenge here. So not so much a critique, a lot more as just an observation and something to consider. What you can make tasty coffee on both of them, but it will probably be quite impossible to mirror the grind size you get using it as a machine versus using it as a hand grinder. And that's kind of important to have with you as it's a product that is trying to do both. Now, moving forward, just a little bit of conclusion here. One of the side notes using the machine is, one, it's quite noisy, which to be fair, all of them are. It's not a lot more noisy than, for example, the fellow grinder would be. However, it's quite difficult actually to see or hear when all of the coffee is ground through. So it's so noisy that you can't really hear if it's still grinding the beans. And I find quite often when I look inside of the grinder after using it as a machine that I actually haven't grinded all the coffee. So it's a little bit of one is a retention issue because you have a lot of fines that are stuck kind of underneath the grinder. But two, you actually quite often have coffee still in the grinder when you're using it because you don't really know. So you kind of have to take it out, have a double check, put it back in, and then grind it out again, right? So not super convenient. But then overall, it's a fairly decent grinder, right? It's not better or worse than anything else. We do enjoy the kind of portable solution. It's kind of cool, but it's a little bit of a challenge to translate then grind size, or you can't translate because the distribution of those particle sizes is going to be so vastly different depending on how you do it. So there's no consistency in it. So let's say you bring this to a competition and you dial in your brews on the hand version of the grinder and then you start using the machine for convenience, you're going to have two very difficult particle ranges, which, one can also, we can flip that around and we can argue, well, it just gives you more versatility, which is kind of nice, but it's for sure not super user friendly. Another observation that we're going to take with us when we do espresso testing on this is that it actually can't really grind so much coffee. The motor is so small that the official recommendation is to basically let it rest for quite a long time. Let's say you brew 3 shots of espresso, you're going to have to let this rest for about, let's say, half an hour until you can use it again, which makes kind of dialing in espresso at home not so fun, perhaps, or at least a very, very slow process. But that's a subject for a future video. We know this is a new grinder. We know some of you might already have it. We're super curious to hear your thoughts on it. Do you have any other favorite hand grinders? We know like grinders is a massive thing here. It's something that the YouTube community in coffee is talking a lot about, so we'd love to hear your input. Is there any grinders that we haven't tested that you want us to test? As per always, we're taking this conversation over to Patreon, and we'll be gifting this unit when we're done with it to someone in our Patreon as well. So if you want it, sign up, and then you might be able to get it. Who knows? With that, we just want to thank Goat Story for sending the grinder our way. We do appreciate it. We're always happy to test out people's product. We're not promising good or bad reviews. We're promising honest reviews based on how we like coffee. But again, thank you to them. Thank you for you guys for watching as well. And with that, we just want to wish you a great day. We want to give a special thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. It's because of you that we are able to continue to make these videos. And we want you all to feel free to always come with suggestions and ideas on the content that you want to see, because we are doing this for you and because of you. Thank you from all of us here at April.